So, welcome to this podcast where we'll be talking about heart rate monitoring, which is the high performance habit for the month of May. And basically, our main aim is to look at the different technologies and products available for heart rate monitoring, also to go a step beyond and say how athletes can utilize heart rate monitoring from the start, and then as they progress, how that utility can be further increased. So that is the perspective which we are going to look at it from. So to start with, let us look at the categories which are available for heart rate monitoring. So when we say categories, Clark, can you tell us what we are looking at?
Well, when we're talking about resting heart rate, you can use your finger, taking your pulse on your wrist or your neck. But then when we're talking about technology, we're talking about using finger-based technologies. We're using wrist-based technology or forearm, and then chest strap technologies. And the last would be the GPS, vests that are out there that some teams use.
And there's some future technologies also to look forward to. So what would those be, Manav?
Things like a ring that's coming up, fitness bands that you can wear, phone apps, of course, to check things like heart rate variability, which would add more layer of detail to the heart rate monitoring. Yeah, so those kind of technology which is coming up now.
So one is the technology which we are talking about is the method of measuring heart rate monitor. The other is the technology which is used in the devices. So I would just like to spell it out and then we move on to the more important stuff. So basically heart rate monitoring is done through two different kinds of methodologies. One is the electrocardiography, which basically looks at the electrical signals pick up your cardiac heart rhythm, and that translates to your heartbeat. So which is mostly used in chest straps, which are used for heart rate monitoring, and most of your finger sensors and even if it's a wrist based or finger sensors, they used more of a light source or optics. It's called PPG, photoplethysmography. So that's just getting the technical part out of the window. But mostly there is the electrical signal based way to capture heart rate, and the other is the optic signals which are used. In terms of communication technology, so when you're wearing a heart rate monitor, how is that signal communicated to your device, right? Whether it's your mobile phone app or your watch. So you can either use Bluetooth or you can use ANT+, right? So Bluetooth is 1:1. So let's say if you are an athlete and your coach also wants to look at what your heart rate data is. Now if you're using Bluetooth, only one of you would be able to see it on one particular device. But whereas ANT+, if both of you can actually source the signal from the same heart rate monitor and see how you're doing. So that is the main differentiation between Bluetooth and ANT+. So when you're making the decision to actually purchase a heart rate monitor, you can look at what your requirement is and decide on
so the coach could see it on the ANT+, and the athlete could also have it on their phone also.
Yeah, so two or more devices ANT+ can cover from the same source, whereas Bluetooth is only 1:1. So let us start with how would an athlete start using heart rate monitoring. What would be the starting step for them to kind of get involved in heart rate monitoring, and what is the utility they can look at it? And then let's evaluate some of the products or the categories based on that.
So when a new athlete comes to us and we talk about heart rate and the benefits to tracking it, the first thing that we talk about is taking the resting pulse in the morning. So there's certain protocols that will be in other videos on how to do that. But that's the first thing. They can do that with their putting their fingers to their neck or to their wrist. But also, I think you kind of have to have a coordination when you do that, because you have to be looking at the clock but also counting the beat here and not get distracted by the second hand if you're using that. So I think using apps where you can put your finger on the camera and figure out the resting heart rate, or if you're comfortable wearing a chest strap at night and then it transmits the heart rate so as soon as you wake up, you can see it that way, or a wrist-based heart rate monitor if you wear it at night. Then you can just see it when you wake up.
How would the accuracy of measuring resting heart rate differ? What is the evidence right now?
All devices, say the apps or the finger sensors that are out there in the market currently, they are fairly accurate compared to a clinical gold standard at rest. Okay, now at rest being the keyword there, when you go into exercise, it changes a little bit. But for athletes who want to monitor their resting heart rate in the morning, provided they follow the right guidelines and use a good enough phone with a compatible camera to the app, then it shows that it will still give you a good number. And
even using the same one.
Yeah, again and again. So if you're even if the number is say 2 or 3, 4 beats higher than what an ECG would give you, you're using the same device again and again. So you establish a baseline, and the goal for an athlete should be to see how far their heart rate deviates from that baseline to see if they've recovered or not. So it should be fairly reliable.
Right, I think from a practical perspective, if you have to look at the pros and cons for measuring resting heart rate only, I think the few things to consider would be, obviously this is one of the more economical ways to do it, but you would want to save that data over and over again instead of measuring it through a pulse oximeter or manually and writing it on a notebook, because if you want to share it with your trainer, then you would want that data to be recorded. What are the other practical considerations? Like some people are maybe not comfortable wearing one particular device.
One is, we alluded to, was the battery life. There are some sleep trackers and fitness trackers out there that don't require charging every day or every couple days even. Others do. And so if you're interested in tracking some of these other things like sleep, that may come in the way, finding a time to charge.
I feel that athletes may be comfortable wearing a wrist tracker and sleeping rather than wearing a chest strap, which is obviously supposed to be still more accurate because the chest strap is measuring your heart rate every second, whereas the optic sensors may be averaging it out over 5 or 10 seconds. But then you have to look at the convenience of the athlete as well.
And I know some people that don't like even the wrist to wear that, so they may need to do the somewhat more complicated version of using their finger.
I think even like the awareness of the guidelines, having used a couple of apps, they don't really tell you what time of the day you got to measure it, what protocols you got to follow before measuring it. So you could wake up to an alarm and straight away measure using that app, or you could do it at 11 because you've forgotten to do it in the morning. So it doesn't really give you a guideline that way.
So I think by and large the standard practice is to do it in the morning and not immediately after you wake up. Coming to the next aspect, so an athlete has started monitoring their resting heart rate. Resting heart rate has its own accuracy issues sometimes, maybe because of the methods, etc. So I think for senior athletes, when I say senior, maybe athletes who are 15 plus, can also start using something called as the heart rate variability, which we've discussed in our videos. And that is probably supposed to be a more accurate measure of readiness. It could still be standardized in the morning, but you could possibly do it at other times of the day when you are rested. So when you're comparing technology and these categories based on heart rate variability, how is this placed? Like, what are the potential gadgets an athlete can use for measuring their heart rate variability? Are the options now limited compared to resting heart rate, or how does it?
Yeah, compared to resting heart rate, they still be a little limited, but then there are now phone apps that use the same camera and give you an HRV score. They do all the numbers and give you a readiness score in the end, so that makes it fairly easy because HRV can have a lot of data involved in it.
They add questionnaires and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then you have chest straps that do it. GPS vests, I haven't seen many GPS vests use HRV yet, until and unless it's connected to a chest strap, which would then come back into the same category. But yeah, you have there's one major app called HRV for training, but that only allows you to measure HRV once during the day if you're using your phone camera. For an athlete who wants to do it, they do have a lot of options.
Essentially the same method that you would do for resting heart rate, except for the finger on the neck and things, but any technological way that you do the resting heart rate can be pretty much applied to HRV, is that right?
Yeah, the only thing is that for HRV, let's say even if a resting heart rate is being taken every second, within that second there could be changes because HRV is basically the time between two heartbeats. So even within a second or every second, your difference between your heartbeats could be 0.9 seconds, 1.1 seconds. So something which can more accurately sense it will obviously try to give a better reading. I think the other limitation is what Manav mentioned is the apps, right? So you also need to have apps which are able to understand those signals and then give you that readiness. And I think one very important thing which Clark mentioned is the questionnaire. So the research which is out there, gives more positive pointers to apps or platforms which are also using the subjective questionnaires, because that is very important to correlate readiness with. Just standalone HRV may not be a very good measure. Your sleep and how you feel.
There are so many variables involved that affect it, so you've got to take it in conjunction with a number of variables to get to a conclusion.
When you're comparing resting heart rate and HRV, an athlete could look at, okay, this is the bottom line, this is my baseline, and this is how high I am compared to my baseline of my resting heart rate, and determine their recovery. So that is mathematical calculation you have to do every time and try to rely on that. Whereas HRV automatically through some of these apps is giving you a readiness score, and then you can focus more on what you need to do rather than first do the calculations and then figure out. And also the reliability, if the measurement is better and the app is standardized, is
and
more.
the resting heart rate's still there also.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. So coming to the other applications of heart rate monitoring, and then looking at these technologies and gadgets, through that lens. So during exercise, now let's talk about a scenario where an athlete is working out or participating in their sport. Let's see how these different categories fit in when we are trying to measure that.
So when we talk about monitoring heart rate during training, we have these wrist-based ones, we have the finger-based ones, we have chest straps, and so the big issue is that the chest strap ones seem to take the heart rate more often and closer to each other, and so it can give a more accurate reading as to, especially when you're playing sport or you're doing interval training.
Absolutely.
When you're doing strength training, your heart rate spikes and goes up and down, and so when you have one that has a bigger gap between when it takes a reading, then you're going to miss out on a lot. So these wrist-based ones, finger-based, forearm-based, they tend to be less accurate when you're training because it misses out on a lot of the intervals that happen naturally when you train.
Yeah, I think now with the latest research and the new products coming in, the wrist-based monitors are trying to close the gap in terms of the accuracy compared to the chest strap.
Yes.
So I think, Manav, you had read up a research where they compared these wrist-based trackers.
So they've, like all the bigger brands, say an Apple Watch for example, it did show some good data compared to a chest strap also. So again, maybe their sampling rate is much quicker, which is the same for GPS trackers as well. So when you're doing GPS also, you need the GPS with a good sampling rate to correlate it with HRV or with resting heart rate or heart rate during exercise.
I think they're using a couple of extra optic sensors also in the device to kind of see how the pulse is regulating. So I think Apple Watch 4 and even the Apple Watch 2 was shown to be within 5 beats per minute compared to a chest strap when the athlete was exercising. And the Apple Watch 4 has also made strides in that regard. But I think the main doubt, if you're looking at independent reviews which are there and research, the main doubt is when you're in a steady state cardio. So let's say you're running at 10 kilometers an hour and you're slowly increasing your pace or decreasing your pace, and there is a minute variation in your heart rate that is pretty much accurately tracked by the new generation of where wrist-based heart trackers. But I think the biggest question is when there is intermittent kind of training, when your heart rate is suddenly peaking and going down and peaking and going down, there still seems to be a lag. I think we've done this at our facility also, where we had a runner during the VO2 max test put on the chest strap as well as the Fitbit.
I've done it with athletes who are actually just doing their training. They have a wrist-based one and they have a chest strap on, and say they're doing a conditioning where they run 5 laps and then they walk and then they repeat that. What we saw was that those wrist-based ones were, when they were running, were still reading a low resting heart or low heart rate, and the ones with the chest strap were already increasing the heart rate. So the wrist-based ones didn't catch up by the time the guy stopped.
And again, it's probably because of the slow sampling rate, because they're just reading it so much.
Now this was a couple years ago that this happened, maybe a year ago. So again, we need to keep up with this. Like you're saying, maybe the Apple Watch and some of these others are adding sensors, and but at this point, we don't have a great data to say that this is completely reliable. Absolutely. I actually have a current person, I think he has a Apple Watch 4 that I want to do this actually this month and compare. So maybe we'll give you the results of that.
Let's look at it in the context of if you're a runner, and if your wrist-based monitor compared to the chest strap, let's say if you're wearing a chest strap, took another 5 to 10 seconds to kind of catch up to an increased heart rate from 115 to 145, it may be okay for you if you're only looking at the heart rate zones. So even if you realize that you're in the next heart rate zone after 5 or 10 seconds, it's okay with you. But when your sports science team or you are trying to look at what was the average heart rate or the max heart rate, especially the average heart rate reading.
Or calories burned.
Or calories burned, which is another thing which we'll address. That may not be ideal for that, but I think if you're only looking at heart rate zones, probably you may still be better off with the new age wrist-based monitors as
Absolutely.
well. Right.
I think wrist-based and chest strap would still be something that could work during training. Finger-based, definitely I'm not a big fan of that because it has so many practical considerations. Like when you're sweating, some apps don't tend to take it. Plus, you got to stay still with pulse oximeter or anything like that. So those practical considerations during intermittent type of exercise, I don't think how.
Yeah, you can't carry a phone around with you and put your
and
finger on there.
Still, and then no sweat on your finger and things like that. So
something that stays on your body and is monitoring continuously, to some degree, is practically going to be better.
Right.
Yeah.